Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Microsoft Unboxed Pod. This is episode 26, and you are joined by Kareem Anderson. And who's my co host today?
David Allen, I did not have any earnings this week, and I am not an AI bot.
I ask every week who's my co host. Like, people are going to expect somebody different. It's David every week, ladies and gentlemen. So
Yes,
disregard when I ask that question.
I'm
Just
not.
expect David.
I'm not going anywhere, guys. I'm sorry. Love me, hate me. Hope you love me, but if you don't, guess what? I'm gonna be
I
here.
like to keep people in suspense. Like, ooh, oh, is it somebody different? It's not. But please don't be disappointed. We have a lot to talk about. I am here with my favorite person to talk Microsoft news. As David alluded to, we're going to be talking about earnings this week. Everyone's posted theirs. We had quite a few actually last week that we didn't cover because, well, we just didn't. They weren't really related to Microsoft. But now that we have Microsoft's earnings, we can kind of put everybody's into context when it comes to the tech industry. We also have a handful of other news topics to talk about that aren't specifically earnings that are still somewhat of downers. But that being said, let's get into our list of headlines so you guys can kind of know what to expect. We're going to be talking about Bungie cutting staff to about 220 employees. I don't even know if they have that many to spare, if they're just picking up people to fire as well, just because the numbers sound better. We'll be talking Microsoft's the earnings. The Q4 was pretty good when it comes to the cloud, but not as good as investors wanted when it comes to AI. And we'll talk about why that's an issue going forward with most companies. We're talking about Canva buying up another company to add to his portfolio, why that's a good thing, and starting to lead down a potentially bad road if it keeps setting precedent. We'll be talking about Gartner predicting the significant AI projects that were all championed about a year and a half ago, why they believe that those projects are going to start coming to an end, and what that might mean for the AI boom. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Teams getting a unified UI potentially, what that means for you and I. And we're going to be doing the earnings roundup, is what I'm calling it, and that is basically the rest of everybody else's earnings, which will cover Apple, Qualcomm, ARM, uh, Amazon, and AMD, I believe, and Intel. Intel is one of the bigger ones with some of probably the saddest news. Before we get to any of that, let's let David jump in because I've just talked for about 2.5 straight minutes. Give us our first headline, buddy.
Well, we have unfortunately some somber news here. Bungie has cut staff by 220 employees. They did send some to Sony. That's about 17% of their workforce, and CEO Pete Parsons said for over 5 years it has been our goal to ship games in three enduring global franchises to realize the ambition. Eh, we set up several incubation products and realized, basically, long story short, that they oversold themselves. They cut themselves too thin. They cut leadership too thin. So Bungie is down to roughly 800 employees now, according to something I saw this morning. They're down to 800 to 850. They spun some of these off into Sony, like I mentioned. The others were let go. Now, I did see something interesting this morning, kind of scrolling the Twitter feeds. IGN had posted several tweets from employees and some that were even still there and looked to have just,
Awkward.
yeah, this was awkward. Um, some that were even still there that were calling for Pete to resign. They said this was crazy. This was uncalled for. This was ridiculous. That, the big leadership, Pete, is being blamed for what has happened here with Bungie. And, there's been a lot, I'm going to throw this little tidbit in there. We saw another gaming headline right before we went on air. Game Informer, the magazine run by GameStop, seems to be shutting down immediately, and people were informed that they would get severance packages. So, we've got shutdowns in the gaming industry and really the tech industry in general. We've got shutdowns in the gaming industry left and right. And, everybody keeps blaming cost. And, we've got to stop this. I really, kind of, and I'm gonna talk about this for just another second. I won't bring you in, but we kind of went through the Microsoft acquisition thing, and Microsoft made some but work together, but it's got to stop. It's I'm not sure how we got in this situation. Everybody wants to blame. Well, we ramped up staffing for COVID, but why are we overspending so far and setting these lofty goals for gaming that we just can't meet? That we get so far in the hole that we keep bleeding employees, people that need to support their families, have mortgages to pay, car notes to make. It's sad. It bothers me that this is the direction we're heading.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I am again. This is a knee-jerk reaction, ladies and gentlemen. So take this with a grain of salt. I am uh, not fully informed on all the ins and goings of Bungie, but when it comes to mass layoffs in general, I think that there should be um, executives who also lose their job because it's their job, it's in their purview
Yes.
to guide away from these kind of things. I don't think you should have an executive necessarily who can helm massive layoffs like this and justify their own position because they're
Yeah.
supposed to be looking out for the company and looking out for the employee as well. I understand that we are, mostly in an at-will hiring for most companies throughout the U.S. That's the way a lot of these contracts are designed. But if my job is to save Bungie money, I should be getting reports that there's an iceberg ahead, and these are some of the adjustments I should be making leading up to the time before I have to fire 220 employees all at once. If this was something that I could have foreseen last year, say they hired, 500 extra employees before I got the position or I got the task to take on this next project. My next goal is to say, all right, where do we shift some of these employees, reprioritize how we're spending on this for the next few years? Maybe I don't, have to let go of 200 employees all at once. Maybe I let go of 10 employees or 10 executives who took on these giant projects who are worth more, financially speaking, than some of these other smaller employees. Or maybe we figure out a different way to share resources when it comes to our QA pool or our producer budgets. How many producers do we have on a single project? Do we need that many of them? I'm just saying, like, there seems to have been a lack of oversight that they are now kind of, everyone tries to dump on the fact that COVID was an issue. And I don't think, people were getting laid off during COVID, prior to COVID. There wasn't like everyone was finding a job during COVID. Like, we had issues. People were saying, because I'm no longer in the office, they don't need me anymore. It wasn't like this, I don't know how many people saw this reported, like, oh, we're getting tons of, I'm getting tons of job opportunities now that COVID's here because no one's in the office. That was quite the opposite, anecdotally speaking. So now it just seems like people are retroactively going, hey, you know what? COVID, we overstaffed for COVID. I'm like, did you really though? Or are you just saying that because now people can kind of justify it somewhat?
I want to pull in our content creator crowds. I got, we all get caught down these YouTube rabbit holes or these TikTok rabbit holes every once in a while, and we watch a certain type of video for a while, then we move on to something else. Well, when I've been watching these earnings and these layoffs, I've been checking out some of these people that vlog the day in the life of their job. And there's day in the life of a software developer at Microsoft, day in the life of somebody at Google, etc. Now, hold on, hang with me here for just a minute. But what I see are these nice offices, these nice buildings, fully staffed kitchen, coffee makers, snacks on every corner. I don't see a whole lot of employees in these videos. You don't see feet walking around, and you see a lot of workstations that the room is empty, and the person doing the vlog is really him or her and two or three other people. So it crossed my mind. I'm older, I'm well into my 40s. There was a time that you took a lunchbox to work, that a cafe or a kitchen at your job and all of these refreshments and employee perks were not part of it. Now, I'm not saying go yank all this stuff out and take away the employee perks, but maybe somebody needs to sit down and look at internal services. If we cut back on some of this stuff and let the employees know it, I think some employees would would rather cut back on some of the perks, maybe change the working environment, smaller buildings, or repurpose the building in some way, make it a cheaper place to work, but they keep their jobs. You know, that
Yeah,
that
no,
was that was something
that-
that got me, because some of these kitchens that they were showing, I'm like, they're spending, that's the first thing that come to my mind. They're spending thousands of dollars a day to feed these people. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of it looks like a high class hotel, and I'm not saying the employees don't deserve it. But I think if you ask the employees, hey, can we cut back on this a little bit? Maybe you bring your water bottle and some sodas if you want them, and we'll have some snacks, you know, and you can keep your job. I think I know the answer to that for most people.
no, I agree with you to a certain extent. I also feel like this is sort of a talking point of the executives, though, because it doesn't address the millions that
True.
executives get in bonuses. I mean, we say you look at your snack department, you look at your refreshments, you look at all the perks, and then you calculate that against the executive who, granted, they have a lot on their plate, but is it worth 10x the assistant producer or the
Hmm.
writer or the engineer or the developer who's working 14 days straight to meet a deadline? Is it 10x that what that employee is doing on a daily basis? I don't think so. So I think we also need to take into consideration, like, hey, maybe instead of giving you 10x the bonus for a job well done on Call of Duty or whatever the previous game is, you get a 2x bonus and everyone else gets a 1x bonus, instead of some people getting a 1x bonus and you getting a 10x bonus and then saying, all right, you guys need to bring in your own sodas to make sure you keep your jobs. If you only got the 2x bonus, that's 8x's of refreshments, perks, healthcare, paid family leave if that's something that they want to provide for their employees, daycare, all these other benefits to keep employees there, to keep employees happy, and to make sure that everything still functions at a level that is sustainable. Versus, all right, well, we keep giving this guy 10x, and now we have one project that didn't do well, fire 85 people because we need to keep this one guy at his 8x or his 10x bonus or whatever.
I agree
We're
with
getting
that
into the
too.
weeds on this,
Yeah, we are.
but we're going to be talking about more along the lines with our next topic, which is Microsoft's quarterly four earnings. Those came in, what was that, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, one of those days. I wrote about it. I should probably know about the specifics, but sometime this week, Microsoft reported theirs. And the takeaway, if you were online and you were just a curious reader via the Twitter or Instagram or whatever, was that Microsoft lost a ton of money. So you're probably thinking like, hey, Microsoft posted their quarterly earnings and they lost about $100 million, $100 billion, $100 billion in stock value. And you're like, well, that must have been a really crappy earnings. In fact, it wasn't, ladies and gentlemen. The numbers were pretty good for Microsoft across the board. They had some drops in hardware and devices, which seems to be an ongoing trend, and could have led to investors saying, you know what, give up the Surface devices. They are just, they are dragging your portfolio down. But other than that, it seems like everything else they delivered on. We're going to get into why after hours trading was so bad for them after I give you some of the details. According to the numbers, Microsoft brought in about $56.2 billion in revenue, and that's on about 20 of that, 20.1 billion was net income for the company, which is pretty good. That's a rise of about 8% when it comes to revenue and about 20% when it comes to net profit. So doing great year over year. So last year they did pretty well, and they were applauded for that. This year they did even better. When it comes to the specific departments, the businesses that they have their business processes, which is, uh, basically their Azure, some of their Azure services, and commercial products. Office commercial products increased their revenue by 12%. So they are, giving more of a product to everybody. Office consumer products and the cloud services increased about 3%, which is up about 6% if you're constant currency counting. Microsoft 365 subscribers grew to about 60.7 million, which is pretty good. I remember when we used to talk about the numbers being in the 30s, so they've managed to keep that going. LinkedIn continues to be a benefit to the company after that purchase. They are up about 5% in their revenue, so they're helming that one pretty well. Dynamics products and cloud services revenue is up about 19%, which is another big gain for them in the quarter. When it comes to intelligent cloud, again, this is all the stuff that is server related, and this is where Azure kind of stretches its muscle. Server products and cloud services revenue increased about 17%. So, like I said, pretty good. And that was driven again by Azure and the other cloud service revenue growth, which was an additional 26% for the company as a whole. Personal computing. This is all the stuff we like to report on, all the fun stuff like Windows and Surface and Xbox and things like that. This is the more convoluted / bumpy return that people got to see. They were up. Their total was about 13.9 billion, which is unfortunately a decrease of about 4% from last year. What we saw was, ironically, the last 2 quarters, there was a slow increase of Windows OEM revenue increasing. That seems to have been flat, if not decreasing, about 12% for this quarter. So for whatever reason, companies just weren't buying as many Windows licenses as they used to, or they were expected to. Devices, which is the big weight or the big anchor on this company right now, the revenue decreased by 20%, which is down from last year, which was also, I believe, somewhere hovering about 18%. Windows commercial products and cloud services revenue did increase, but only about 2%. Search and news advertising, Bing's still a thing. Excluding traffic acquisitions, cost increased about 8%. So they are beefing up Bing a little bit more than they are bringing in at the moment. Microsoft returned about $9.7 billion to shareholders in the form of share repurchases and dividends for the fourth quarter. With all that being said, the reason why Microsoft saw about a 7% slide in their stock evaluation, like I said, totaling almost $100 billion, was because they are spending a lot for AI. And now investors are saying, what's become of that? Microsoft, and I believe their investors' call said that they're confident they're going to continue to spend on AI. But I think investors are saying, hey, we're seeing across the board in the industry that AI is costing us both in human capital and resource, but also financial. And we have yet to see a clear path of profit going forward. And that isn't just specifically for Microsoft, even though these are Microsoft investors, but in general, we haven't seen a company that say, hey, here is what AI is bringing in, like cloud is bringing in, and it's bringing in this amount of money continuously. So again, we're 2 years into it. That seems to be the question. I will add one more note and then I'll let David jump in. The Activision Blizzard acquisition seems to be paying off almost immediately for the gaming division of Microsoft. And it's, basically obfuscated the fact that Microsoft is still losing on hardware. We are year 5 into the Xbox X Series S and X life cycle, and it is trailing obviously Sony behind by a lot. I think it's trailing even the Xbox One at this point, a pretty sluggish sale. But because Microsoft is now essentially a publisher and they own the stockade of titles and franchises that belong to Activision Blizzard, they saw a basically 50% positive impact on the business sector for that portfolio, with revenue up about 44%, and services were up about 61%, meaning Xbox gaming. A lot of people basically took a subscription on in order to get access to a lot of the Call of Duty stuff or the old Activision Blizzard titles. But like we said, Xbox hardware was negative 42%. So for as much as Activision Blizzard's doing, the hardware division seems to be doing more to chip away at that. And again, that also includes leftover stuff from the HoloLens division as well. We know that Surface just launched in June, launched their Qualcomm PCs that should hopefully give them a small bump. We know Intel is going to be scheduling to release theirs next month in September, so maybe I'll add to that as well for whatever Qualcomm doesn't pick up. What are your thoughts on everyone saying, you know what, great earnings, everybody, but what about AI?
I don't think we know what AI is going to do yet, and I don't think we know how businesses are going to leverage AI yet. I think there's still a lot of companies out there that are watching. You're I've noticed just in this week, paying bills and helping people, that a lot of your customer service are basic AI bots, or even, AI bots answering phones and trying to direct you or take care of what you need. I have seen some, personal changes in some of the places that I deal with in the last few months. But I think companies are watching, what is AI going to do? What can we use it for? And I think there's a little bit of a wall there, a little bit of a gray area where Microsoft, Google are saying AI does this. Here's an on-stage demo. But I sense that some companies are struggling of how to adapt it into their workflow. I've just got a feeling there, and that they don't know what they need. When you buy a PC, it's plug and play, pretty much. When businesses buy Office 365 licenses, they're plug and play. I think something has been introduced here that breaks the current, well, it doesn't break it necessarily. It alters the way we get info. It alters the way we process info. We're not just going to a search engine. And companies are wondering, okay, how do we use this? What does it cost us? And is the juice worth the squeeze? Do we get what we need out of it? And can we get what we need out of it? Is it a one-time use thing, or is it something we use every day? Do we need to hire an employee? Do we need to hire employees, to do this? What about integration? Well, we need it integrated over here. What's that going to cost us? Is Microsoft going to make it easier? Are they going to give us an API? I think, companies are still waiting to see. Now, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, etc., we've talked about it on the pod before. AI, everybody rushed out. Hire the people. We got to get it. We got to get these language models going. We got to get these partnerships going. I think for the sake of earnings, we went too quick. Microsoft bleeding money on AI. Google's bleeding money on AI. Amazon's bleeding money on AI. They're waiting almost like at a lunch line. Please buy this plate of food. Well, what's on that plate of food? What can it do for me?
No. Don't look at the plate of food. Just buy it.
Yeah, and there's a trust thing there. They want to be trusted, and I don't think businesses they're watching with interest. I'll go that far. They're watching with interest, but I don't know that it's going to be adopted with the hope that Microsoft and Google, and that came with this rushing speed, that they hope they're going to get it back. They're going to get that investment back in 5 years. I don't see that.
Yeah, we'll talk about kind of the reality versus the marketing pitch for AI a little later when we talk about Apple's earnings and kind of what they're doing that's potentially going to disrupt a few things in both good and bad ways. But I will let you talk about Canva.
Yes, please. Canva is one of my favorite tools. Canva made another investment this week. Boy, that talk about people spending money. Canva has been on a buying trail here. They have bought,
This
I
is a bit
believe
more
it's,
tangible, though.
yeah, this I got a good feeling about. We know they bought Affinity a while back, but now they have added something I hadn't heard of, Leonardo.ai. And for those that have never heard of it like myself, it is image generation and image manipulation. So what Canva is betting on here, for those that don't know what Canva is a online graphic creation. You can create flyers, you can create logos, you can create a graphic that you need for your blog post. You can create anything that you can come up with. Canva has a way to create it in their interface. So their hope is, by acquiring Leonardo.ai, is they can incorporate AI better into those creations. I know this was something my esteemed co-host thought about last week when we brought up Canva. It was Adobe we brought up for Canva one. Last week you mentioned they needed a better AI element. So is this it? Is this what Canva needs? I want to see Canva jump into something with video. I want to see Canva take something with Affinity, offer a video option, go after Adobe. That's a little bit off topic, but I see this as the next step of
Yeah.
being the one
I was
stop
going to add,
shop.
they're definitely on their way. I think we mentioned at the top of this pod that it could be a path towards regulation pretty soon, though. They are the underdog when compared to Adobe, but we have to keep
Yep.
in mind that since they've been introduced, I believe in 2017, they've bought 8 other, imaging softwares slash services products, and added them to the portfolio. And this is going back from Zedings in 2018, Pixbay in 2019, Pixels Pexels in 2021, Smarm Mockups. I think I'm saying that right. In 2022, in 2021, Flourish in 2022, and now Affinity Photo in 2024, plus Leonardo as well. And as much as I love to see them doing this and buying tangible things to make their products better for the customers and end users, they are also essentially a subscription service. And we are championing this underdog, but who's to say they don't build the next Adobe and all these companies that were these small individual mom and pop things that you used to just go to and pay perhaps maybe a couple bucks here and there, or maybe it was free as a mobile app, are now being sucked into the subscription service, which will end up leading us back to where we're at with Adobe, just another version of Adobe with different tools, a set of tools that can be used that are all, sort of cloud-based generative AI things. Again, the execution is where everyone's going to have their subjective opinions about it, whether or not these tools are subjectively offered better than Adobe offers them, or offered in different forms that Adobe doesn't have. But if they're all essentially, here's $15 and you get access to all of these things within Canva, we're right on the path of, here's $25 for Adobe and you get all these things, and we're the standard bearer. So I'm happy on one hand that they are buying, competing, but I'm also very cautious to see that, hey, you guys have been around for 8 years, and every year you keep buying new and new things. You haven't developed anything within your own to claim as your own, and you're at the end of the day taking things off the board for people who only need 1 or 2 things. Maybe people don't need the marketing aspects of Canva; they just wanted the text to generative AI of Leonardo because they didn't want to pay for Midjourney. Now you've taken Leonardo.ai off the board and bundled into Canva, which again, they didn't want Canva, they didn't need Affinity, they just wanted Leonardo because they didn't want to pay for Midjourney. So I said all that to say I'm conflicted. I'm happy for right now, but I do see a couple more purchases and Lena Khan going like, can we have a word? Can you sit down and let's talk?
I think there's going to have to be some talking in the industry as a whole, because I feel like anything, and feel free to chime in here, anything that involves AI right now is going to equal up to some kind of subscription, first of all. And in a lot of cases, it's going to end up being some type of bundling to try to get you to use their product with that AI service you're paying for. Kind of sounds like a Microsoft product that the EU was wanting.
Hey,
Team,
shh!
yeah,
We
yeah, yeah.
already money. Don't wake up the EU again.
No, we don't want to wake them up, but it does sound like a specific product from Microsoft that said you need to debundle Teams because not everybody wants the other thing. Now, we're going to see, does the same concept apply to other companies as they continue to bundle AI and services together? And if they don't give you just AI or just the service, what do these regulatory bodies have to say about it?
Are you trying to hint that there's hypocrisy when it comes to finances and regulation?
Just a little bit.
All right. Well, we'll leave that there. We'll let the regulators sit on that one. You guys think about what you've done. We're gonna move on to our next topic, which is Gartner predicting a significant AI project closures in 2025. And for those of you who are bad at math, I'll do it for you. Next year, as soon as next year,
Yep.
Gartner believes that about 30% of the high-profile projects that we are becoming indoctrinated with, things like Copilot potentially, Gemini, who knows? Maybe not from those big guys, but other ones. And I believe our last story with about Canva and Leonardo.ai is probably one of those things. You know, who knows if Leonardo.ai would have sustained itself or lasted in the next year as more text to image kind of generating tools become sucked up into these bigger projects. But anyway, on to Gartner's predictions. Gartner writes in their latest press release, and again, this is an analyst firm, so you know they have their finger kind of on the pulse of certain things when it comes to tech. They are saying that, I'll make sure I get it right, at least 30% of generative AI, Gen AI projects will be abandoned after proof of concept by the end of 2025 due to poor data quality, inaccurate risk control, escalating costs, and unclear business values. This seems to be the theme of our
Of this
podcast
podcast.
is right there. We should have just called it
Yeah.
unclear business value. Maybe I'll change the title again. It should be unclear business value because this is what we're hitting. Microsoft got hit for their stock thing. Rita Salman, Sallam. I apologize for mispronouncing that. The distinguished VP analyst at Gartner spoke to a group of attendees at the company's analyst summit in Sydney, Australia this week and discussed the elephant in the room when it comes to AI and the material benefits that customers are supposed to be getting, which will then turn into tangible profits for the business ventures and for investors. Quote, after last year's hype, executives are impatient to see returns of Gen AI investments, yet organizations are struggling to prove and realize value. As the scope of initiatives widen, the financial burden of developing and deploying general AI models is increasingly felt. So not only did companies basically introduce to investors, hey, here's our new honeypot, here's where we're going to start making a new way to make money is AI. And they've also gone and said, hey, keep giving us money and we'll keep growing this pot. And investors said, all last year, sure, here's the money, take it, grow that pot. And then when it came time to write checks and cash out, the investors, all right, where's our money? Where's the pot at? What do we put it into? And now companies are just saying, we're still growing that pot. We're still figuring it out. We're not getting enough data from people. And we're going to need more servers in order to get exactly where we need to get. Right now, we just have a small sample size. We need a much bigger sample size. You know who these generative AI developers sound like? They sound like every scientist in a movie who says they need funding, and they will do anything for funding. We just need more funding, and we could solve all the world's problems. And when people give the funding, they say we just need a little bit more, just a little bit more. It's kind of a crackhead.
Is it that, or since we're in 2024, is it a campaign manager?
I think you're onto something. If you want to expand on that, go ahead. I'll give a few more details after this. After you
You
go
know,
ahead.
my friend here is right on target. I can't say it enough, and I don't want to repeat myself. I agree with everything he just said, and I think the ending here is kind of what I mentioned in the bungee process. You mentioned, throwing money into a pot. Well, you keep throwing money into that pot, you fill up one pot, you get a bigger pot. Eventually, you stop getting bigger pots, and you've spent all this money, and you've got nothing to show for it. So then you've got to turn around and say, all these people we hired on these projects that we thought this pot was going to produce money for, you've now got to leave and go find another job. So I'm concerned as a consumer, not somebody who is a tech analyst, a tech reviewer. I hit this Copilot button on my PC many times a day. I'm going to wear the cover off of it because Kareem and I understand what it can do. But I think businesses are out there throwing darts at the wall with the investor's pot over here, holding it in their hand. We've got it. Throw a dart up, that one hit. Up, the next one, that one hit. That didn't hit. Well, how many misses are investors going to give? And I think we're
I
getting
mean,
ready to start finding that out.
I agree with you. Based on this report, when it comes to dollars and cents, some companies are committing upwards of $20 million on deployment alone for these AI projects. $20 million, ladies and gentlemen. Not to mention initial investments that range in billions, and that includes, for an example, handling retrieval augmented generation, RAGs tools can cost up to $200,000 per user estimated cost. So anytime anyone uses that generative project, and between 250 to $600 more with complex AI solutions, which again adds about that $20 annual company bill that you're investing in these AI projects. Now, for the return on that, I don't know any sort of subscription model you're going to have that will quickly recoup all of that.
Quickly being the key word.
Yeah, exactly. Because this isn't the days of the start of Netflix or Amazon where you could just burn through money because you had an infinite audience. I believe investors are becoming a bit more keen, or at least not keen, but necessarily skittish when it comes to, projects of this nature, because we just kind of went through the Bitcoin thing, and that came and went pretty quickly. And I think some people are starting to say, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't give AI another 3 or 4 years. We need to start seeing some return for this $20 million we keep investing annually. Now, with all that being said, she said 30% of the AI projects, which means there's still 60% or 40 or 70% of AI projects that will be continued on, and we'll just see how long those go. If they're discontinued in 2026, perhaps, who knows? But with that being said, we're going to move on to our next headline because we still have a chunk of sections to get through some other quarterly things. We're going to be talking about Microsoft Teams getting finally a cleanup when it comes to the chat UI that it has. We know that Teams is kind of, it was a pretty good solution when it comes to Slack alternative. Now, granted, if you ask people anecdotally, some people will have good experiences, some people will have bad. I think some people prefer Slack. Maybe it's just history or familiarity with it, but there are some people who do prefer Teams. Unfortunately, Teams has gotten a bit convoluted, and the way that they've kind of done the new UI, or the most recent UI, has put a lot more focus in the chats, which means the channels have been kind of left to falter, but the UI is still there, which means it's also cluttering up the sections. So it seems like some people are testing out, or at least internally, a new version of Teams that will clear up that and basically unify that entire section. So you won't just have a bunch of open channels that nobody's accessing, plus all the chats that you want to see when you have to go into a different section for chats in order to do real discussions. Now, quote, "Our new experience brings chats and channels together to get you to what matters faster," said one of the executives, and they're talking about this internal Microsoft Teams version. The existing messaging features in Microsoft Teams includes a separate chat section for direct messages and a small group chat section, which again we know as channels. But We haven't seen any screenshots of this. We just know that they're working on it internally. Hopefully, they figure it out and kind of do something similar-ish to the way Skype does it. It'd be ironic that they're going back to Skype to get some help for a new chat client. But anything to make Teams more usable and more user-friendly, so we can have less horror stories about Teams would probably be appreciated. What are your thoughts on that?
I like this. I hope we clean it up, and I find it interesting that maybe this is why the Skype brand refuses to die. Maybe Microsoft is seeing something in the consumerish workflows of it and statistics that consumers like it. So maybe that's why they haven't killed it. Maybe right here on my desktop, I've got the Teams for consumers and the enterprise teams that we use. They did combine those recently. So, why not try something different? And I'll go so far as to say I wouldn't be completely against Skype accounts being able to sign into Teams here and have one cohesive place to communicate, exchange documents, exchange files, and let companies choose whether you get the Skype sign in or not, because of course that could lead to some personal conversations and whatnot. But I think this is a good idea. As far as Slack goes, I do use Slack. It's not perfect, but I do think there are some things that Microsoft could take on that. Slack is a very lightweight interface. It's a very quick interface, and Teams has never been all that lightweight or all that quick. So maybe they can borrow something from that.
Totally agree. We're in our last section, which is what, like I said, I call the earnings roundup.
He saves the money for last.
Yeah, we got some ups and downs in this whole section. We'll start with Alphabet, Google, one of Microsoft's biggest competitors. And we see that their revenue jumped about 14% in what they consider their Q2 of the earnings for this year. Google's parent company, Alphabet, reported earning net income of $23.6 billion on a revenue of $87.4 billion, which is pretty big, for the quarter ending on June 30th, 2024. Those figures represent a year-over-year growth of about 22% and 14% when it comes to net revenue. Quote, our strong performance this quarter highlights ongoing strengths in search and momentum in cloud, says Sundar Pichai. We are innovating at every layer of the AI stack. Sounds very much like Satya Nadella when he says stuff like that. Our long-standing infrastructure leadership and in-house research teams positions us as technology evolves and as we pursue many other opportunities ahead. With all that being said, they had a very good quarter, just like Microsoft did. And guess what? They were hammered in after-hours trading, and they lost about 5% of their stock as well. And guess what? For the same similar reasons. Total Google services delivered $73.9 billion in revenue, with an advertising department, or their advertising business, accounting for about $64.6 billion of that figure. So if you kind of do the math on that, that's a majority of their services department comes just alone from advertising. All those ads you get on the screen, all that information, all that personal information they gather from and sell to advertisers, that's all one business that makes up a chunk of what they do. Both were up dramatically year over year for the quarter, about 11.5% and 10% respectively. And advertising accounted for about 70% of Alphabet, not just Google, Alphabet's total revenue. So mind you, Alphabet was broken up into, their space ventures, their home tech ventures. Like they have a bunch of companies under this. Most of those just lose money, except for advertising. Google search was the biggest chunk of that advertising, bringing in about $48.5 billion. YouTube was second, with its own bringing in about $8.7 billion in revenue, while Google Network landed about $7.4 billion. Google subscription platforms and devices, previously known as Google Together, added another $9.3 billion in revenue, up about 12.6% year over year, accounting for the remainder of the Google services business. Google's cloud revenues exceeded. Now, this is where it gets interesting because they had a pretty good cloud growth. Now, mind you, they were kind of starting at zero. So any kind of gains are always, a magnitude bigger than what is actually represented by the numbers. But Google's cloud revenue exceeded about 10 billion of that for the first time, with the business growing about 22.4% in the quarter and about 10.3 billion. Alphabet's president and CIO Ruth Porat noted that Google Cloud also delivered 1 billion in operating profit, which is a dramatic increase from the 395 million that they had done a year ago. So that's what I meant. Like 1 billion sounds great and huge when you compare it to 395 million, but when you're dealing in numbers like Amazon and Microsoft are doing, maybe not, maybe a little less impressive. Anyway, Alphabet reported consolidating efforts for its AI services, and they kind of dumped it in this new venture called, what is it called? Make sure I get this right. Alphabet-led activities. That business lost $2.3 billion compared to last year when it lost $1.2 billion. And this is where investors kind of perked their head up and was like, what's going on here? But, they justified it the same way every company's saying, like, we are investing in the future, so just keep giving us money. But again, the numbers are backwards. Last year, 1.2 billion in loss. This year, 2.3 billion. If we keep giving you money, what do we get next year? 4.2 billion? Who knows? And this is why their stock was hammered. What are your thoughts on them? And then I'll get to the next couple companies.
I think it's just going to be the trend until we get this AI thing figured out. And I think Google and everybody's trying to figure out how much are investors willing to give, and how much investors are willing to give, and how much of a risk they're willing to take is how far we're going to go. When the investors start pulling back the reins on this, just like when Amazon did the Fire Phone, and that's something that comes to mind. That failure of a product.
Rest in peace.
Investors supported it. They threw money at it. But as soon as investors pulled that money, project is over. And, that's something we got to watch for.
Yeah. Speaking of investors throwing in money, AMD saw a nice increase. They are the number 3 talked about company as of right now when it comes to chipsets. They were number 2 until Qualcomm decided to step into the room. But AMD quietly had a very good quarter. They were up about 9% in their quarter. Microprocessor maker AMD reported that it earned about 265 million on revenue, 5.8 billion in the quarter, and that's also ending in June. The revenues are up about 9% year over year. And quote, and this is from the CEO of AMD and the chair, "We delivered strong revenue and earnings growth in the second quarter, driven by record data center segment revenue." So this is, they're kind of squeezing in the Intel server chip business. Our AI business continued to accelerate, and we are well positioned to deliver strong revenue growth in the second half of the year, led by demand for Instinct, EPYC, and Ryzen processors, or EPYC, I guess. The rapid advance in AI, generative AI, are driving demand for more compute in every market, creating significant growth opportunities that they delivered on AI leadership across their business. They just announced, I think, is it just now, their new NPU-led AI processors for PCs. So again, when they get those on the shelves, I believe, starting in September, that will also help increase for them. But again, I think they're seeing, and they're at least eyeing, the market when it comes to servers, which is bad news for Intel, which we'll get to in a second. ARM revenue jumped about 39% for the quarter. They were up to about 939 million when it comes to that. They earned a net income of 223 million on that 939 million in revenue. Again, year over year, that's about 112%. So they have seen a big uptick when it comes to people using their processors, both in mobile and on desktop, it seems like. We're also seeing Qualcomm, because again, ARM and Qualcomm are technically separate. Their revenue was up about 11% to about 9.4 billion. They earned about a net income of 2.1 billion on that 9.4 billion revenue for, again, their quarter ending in June. They were up about 18% when it comes to net income, and about 11% when it comes to revenue, and that's year over year. They also are expecting to see more increases later in the year, as well as next year when they start to introduce more advanced chips as well. At least that's what they said in some of their earnings. We're going to get to Apple and Amazon, but I just want to know what you think about chipset makers kind of cashing in, and what's your thoughts on Intel? Because I glossed over, but I know you want to get into it.
Intel is a mess. I'm gonna say that up front. It kind of goes back to the investor thing. Um, I'm old school. I remember the first Intel AMD chip battle and everybody watching and hoping that Intel had finally met its match. Long story short, Intel comes up with our better, what was a better chip back then, kind of starves AMD off, and AMD goes away for a few years. And then they start coming back with these lower end Ryzen chips. Oh, that looks like a Core i3. That looks like a Core i5. That looks like an i7. Well, look, it performs and it's cheaper. The gamers like it. So suddenly they've got something. So Intel goes back to the board and says, hey, we've got to come up with something too. So they start pumping out, the better i5s, the i7s. I think it started about, for me, about 12th, 13th gen maybe. And then that whole efficiency thing showed up. Intel has never had a truly efficient processor in comparison to its counterpart. And when Qualcomm entered the stage with these Snapdragon laptops, these lovely things, and you give us 12, 13 hours of battery life or more, and we're not sacrificing a whole lot in the way of performance, you start looking at Intel a little differently, and it makes you wonder how many rounds of lab prototypes and billions of dollars have been put into trying to do what AMD and Qualcomm have done. I said it last week when we discussed this. It was concerning to me as we have posted news this year. Intel was last to the table. Intel has never been last to the table until now. And to me, when Snapdragon came, AMD came right out and said, "Yep, you're getting ours late July, August, early September. They'll be on the market." Intel, we're introducing ours in September. So are you telling me we're going to get market October, November? If you're late and you're Intel, to me, that's a red flag. They're laying off people. That's a whole other story in itself. It was mass layoffs coming to Intel were announced yesterday. So they are losing somewhere, and they're losing a lot of money trying to keep up with Snapdragon, Qualcomm, and the AMD. Suddenly, CPUs are a three-horse race, not just a, let's call it 1.5, two-horse race. And when you have to split it, something's got to give, and Intel's the one giving right now.
Well, Intel's been on a steady decline, slow bleeding, as you would say.
Yep.
Intel shares specifically for this quarter, though, fell about 30% on Friday. And like I said, we've been talking about 7%, 5%, and 6% for Microsoft, Google, and some other companies, respectively. They lost 30%. That's pretty huge, which is leading to about, in order to stem the bleeding, the only way you get investors to stay on board is when you say, hey, we're going to fire employees. That seems to be the big go-to for companies. And with that being said, you hinted at 15,000 jobs are planned to be scrapped in order to stem some of this bleeding. And that's, on top of the 1.6 billion in losses that they occurred for the second quarter. And looks like their outlook, which is probably even worse, which has probably hurt them even more. Maybe they lose about 20% versus the 30%. Is that they don't have a pretty positive forecast coming forward. Most companies will say, all right, we're through the worst part here. We're going to come up in the upswing. No, it seems like Intel's saying, we haven't hit rock bottom yet, ladies and gentlemen. So knuckle up. This is what's coming. The plunge continues, a downward streak for Intel. which again, the shares fell about 5.5% on the day, and in total, now that we're kind of looking at everything, about a 30% drop in their stock overall. And then, not only is Intel having that problem, it's also their poor performance is weighing on the semiconductor market or as a whole. So that talks about companies in Asia that help them build or help them develop and manufacture some of the chips. Samsung, it's weighing down on them as well, because the confidence in semiconductor chips, again, these server chips, with Intel doing as poorly, has everyone else kind of worried about where they stand on this. So TMSC is also kind of suffering. So most ARM was down a little bit, based on, again, nothing having to do with their own stock, but in relation to what Intel is kind of doing to the whole market industry. I think part of the, to your point, alluding to them not being able to produce a chip that's efficient, is that they're, again, we talked about this, like being squeezed both in the mobile chip section, the desktop PC section, which also includes ultrabooks or whatnot, and servers. Servers, the biggest thing is that NVIDIA came up and has gotten probably overvalued, to a certain extent, because of their position in server chipsets that they're going to be producing for everybody. That will power a lot of this AI stuff going forward. So if you have two things going for NVIDIA, we're in the cloud, and what every investor is talking about AI, we're powering that in the cloud. Intel isn't necessarily, they're in that section, but you see NVIDIA has already surpassed them, and they've gotten a lot of positive branding for that. Intel is struggling, and their pivot was going to be, as a fab company, they were going to produce chips for everyone else. We are about year 5 into this plan of their 5-year plan, and this fab, holistic repurposing plan isn't working out nearly as well as Intel thought it would be. They're still working on getting it out, getting those fab processor plants in the U.S. like they said they were going to do, and get them staffed and working. They're still working on all of that so that they can rely less on their own Intel core chips and say, hey, we're just producing for TSMC, we're producing for Samsung, we're doing all this stuff here in the States. That's where we make our money. They're still building that out, and it's taking forever. And so in the meantime, they're losing a ton of money. It's unfortunate that 15,000 people need to be laid off in order to, make up for what I, again, consider mismanagement at the executive level. When you lose 15,000 people, someone needs to be fired, someone prominent who okayed a lot of these indecisions, saying like, all right, we can continue to go about this. And if, maybe, either didn't know about the red flags, didn't understand the red flags, or just ignored them. 15,000 people are a lot of people who are going to be falling into a work environment where their neighbors are also being laid off from other companies as well. And I don't see that being very positive for our U.S. economy, their lives in general. So shame on everybody who failed at this section, specifically Intel. Moving into our last section, we have 2 more companies we're talking about, which is Amazon and Apple. We're getting into Amazon real quick. Amazon's revenue was up about 10%. It's about to 148 billion. They earned about a net income of 13.5 billion on revenues of 148 billion for the quarter. That number represents about a 50% gain when it comes to net income, and about a 10% gain year over year when it comes to revenue in general. AWS delivered an operating income of about 5.4 billion on revenue of 22.1 billion in the quarter. But the retail operations delivered the biggest numbers for North America, at least North American retail, because we are gullible and buy everything online these days. And Prime Day is close to being a holiday here, unfortunately, in the U.S. Retail operations posting about 3.2 billion on revenue of 82 billion. So we shoveled 82 billion their way this quarter, while international added a net loss of 895 million on revenue of 29.7 billion. So I'm sorry to say it, ladies and gentlemen, I think the international community has it right. Smaller mom and pop stores are where you need to go. They're going to cost you a little bit more, but hopefully they have the better customer service and the accessibility. I think we're relying too much on Amazon when the discrepancy is 82.5 billion here in North America versus 29.7 billion everywhere else in international waters. Breaking down its retail operations, the online store delivered $51 billion in revenue. That's about down three, but it's down about 3% year over year. While the physical stores added 4.9 billion, that's about up 7%. And third-party sellers, they grew their third-party sellers business or services about 20% to about 29.8 billion. Amazon's consumer subscription provided 9.7 billion in revenue. That's up about 17% because they keep raising the price of Prime on us. And Amazon's advertising business saw the biggest growth at 23%. That's about 9.5 billion. Again, they took after hours hit as well because AWS, as successful as it's doing, they are spending more to build out their AI sections of that. AWS as a whole, as a cloud services, actually did well. I think they had 30% margins for the quarter, but because they're spending and bleeding for AI, investors are saying, "Hey, we're a little bit weary." Plus, there was a report, I believe, and I don't think we ever really covered it, or maybe we did. I think we did last week about their hardware taking such a big hit over year for the last 10 years. So, combine the losses in hardware and the losses in AI, and investors are saying, "All right, enough Amazon. Focus on what you do best." Lastly, we have Apple, and then you can kind of round up the last of this podcast. I'll give you the final words on this. We have Apple's earnings up about 4.9%. That's to 85.8 billion. Apple just prints money at this point in time. Their net income is of 21.4 billion on 85 billion in revenue. That represents a gain of about 8.4% when it comes to net income, which is great for them, and about 4.9% when it comes to revenue, which shows investors that they could still bleed water out of a rock somehow. But it's still a drop off when it comes to iPhone sales in China, which is kind of a big hindrance for them. They thought they'd have a lifeline in China for a lot longer than they're getting out of it. I think this all started about 7-8 years ago. The iPhone remains Apple's biggest business, of course, but revenues for that fell slightly year over year, about 39.3 billion from the 39.7 billion that they were last year, which is interesting. So maybe people are just figuring out, I don't need an iPhone every 2 years or even 3 years. That was still enough to account for about 41% of Apple's direct revenue, though. So Apple iPhones still account for close to 50% of the business, not entirely. They've done a pretty good job of shifting from the iPhone solely to the services. Apple didn't break out iPhones specifically, like which ones are doing well. But again, revenues in China fell about 6.5% to only 14.7 billion for the quarter. Apple News Services, as I was just mentioning, powered another 24.2 billion in revenue, and that's up 14%. So they continue churning out, services. People are signing up for Apple Music, I guess, at in different intervals at different prices. The Mac delivered 7 billion in revenue, up about 22.5% year over year, suggesting a decent start for the MacBook Air M3 and iPads. People were big on iPads this year or this quarter. They got 23.7% on 7.2 billion in revenue. And it seems like people were sold on that. And I think we're going to be getting newer iPad models again, probably towards the end of the year. But the wearables, home accessories business, flat. So the new watches and all that kind of stuff, the HomePod, whatever, those aren't making a dent really for the company. That's it for the earnings. I'm gonna let you wrap up our pod. What are you thinking? One thing before. What I wanted to mention was that Apple is about to disrupt NVIDIA's soaring stock price because they reported that Apple Intelligence was built on Google's Tensor GPUs. And if this thing does well, which by all accounts is not a done deal, their AI was just released, I believe, for testing last week or this week. And people are saying it's basically Siri still with a few added features. So again, it's not the end all be all, but if Apple can turn it around, that will tell other people, other investors who have been funneling money to NVIDIA thinking that they were the only game in town and that they were the only GPU company that could power these AI things. If Google or Apple can make Google's Tensor GPUs worth nodding at, that could disrupt NVIDIA and probably bring the stock price back down to something more realistic. That's the end of what I had to say. You can go ahead and finish.
I think, you're kind of leading into what's on my mind. I could sit here and, say we're spending too much on AI for the other companies you mentioned and repeat, what I've said before. But what you said there about Apple, we're a Microsoft website. We're a Microsoft podcast, but we love all things tech. And we have kind of given Apple, I have given Apple a beating for not having AI when Microsoft and, Google has. But here we are kind of reversing the process. Look at all this money and all these job losses and all this uncertainty, you know, for Microsoft, for Google, for Amazon. And then Apple's sitting over here. They went and found a partner, and they're not necessarily developing their own, at least not yet, their own massive AI models to do these things with. So we talk about this AI boom and people surviving, and the whole time you were sitting there talking, my brother used to be a huge Apple fan, and something he used to say was, Apple is late to the party, but when they arrive at the party, they usually do it the right way. Whether you're a fan of their product or not, what they do is usually without a lot of the mistakes of the ones before them. Such as, we don't have a folding phone yet for Apple. Apple has sit there and watched 5 versions, or now 6 versions of the Z Fold. We've seen rendering of what an iPhone foldable might look like. And this kind of goes back to the revenue that you mentioned and the financial statement. Is Apple doing the right thing? I'm wondering if they could be. Could they be the company that when everybody else starts dropping these AI projects, if that happens, and starts cutting these AI budgets? Yep, we did ours last. We did it the slender way. We went and got a partner. We went and got Google chips that may or may not be cheaper than NVIDIA. We don't know. They may or they may not be. We don't know. But is Apple showing us the way that AI will eventually be? I don't think that's completely wrong. I think, how many Apple products other than the Vision Pro? They kind of went out in left field with the Vision Pro. But how many Apple products have failed? I want to add, how many have failed? And I'm not saying I'm going to go to the Apple store this afternoon and hug a MacBook. I'm looking at their business practices and how they're introducing their product, how they're spending their money, and how it looks very different than Google, Amazon, and even Microsoft. You don't hear that Apple's pouring money into this. They're partnering up. They're showing you the consumer side of what appears to be a limited language model. Is that the way? I'm starting, it's going to be interesting to see. Is that the way that we end up? And you mentioned this off mic. Smaller language model, more direct, less resources. But I'm hoping we don't have to keep seeing this bleed of money, which leads to bleed of jobs to get there.
Perfect. I couldn't have said it better. If people want to talk to you, if Apple wants to reach out to you and give you some info, some insider knowledge, where can they find you?
David PHA 1978, and that is X, formerly known as Twitter, and Threads. I'm also over there. And if Apple wants to reach out and share some knowledge, I'd be happy to listen.
They can find me at Mindhead1 on X or Twitter. You can find me at Kareem Anderson on Instagram and Threads. We want to thank you for spending another lovely weekend with us, and hopefully you walk away a little bit more informed and can go impress all your friends with all your new dinner table talk conversation topics. Go touch some grass. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the weekend if you can. If it's not raining where you're at, enjoy the sun. Not too much, because I know it's going to be another hot one.
Very hot.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, folks.